I can't stand any of that. If you're planning your social life next week, it's hip hop. So we're looking at hip hop management next week. Who were the great hip hop managers who looked after? You probably know Suge Knight, some of you. We're going to be, and we know what he did with Death Row Records. But we'll be looking at some of the other, the pioneers and the innovators. So if there's any hip hop people who are going to come back next week, is the one for you. Last week, broad introduction. Management, why would we care? And today we're going to go and we're going to look at a specific era in history. And when I was doing the research for this, one of the things that I thought is that old people like me tend to stop people doing things. We kind of close off the range of options. And young people, not all of you, and not old people are in the opposite category, tend to experiment, tend to do things, tend to open up possibilities. So we'll keep that in mind. If that happens again, we'll abandon the microphone. Okay, they're only music managers. Why would we care? Here's why. And I found this quote. I was down in Volume Records, some of you go to Volume, and I bought a book, kind of because I felt sorry for it, but it was a brilliant book. Really, really good book. And I found this quote in it, and it's from a woman who will be revealed, and she said, I cared more about trying to change the world and make it a better place. That's what punk was about. Young people figuring out what they wanted from this world. The first thing they have to realise is that they're all victims of propaganda. The only way to do that, to figure out where the propaganda is and what it's doing, is through culture. Culture is the antidote to propaganda. I thought that's a really good way to think about music management, to think about you playing your computer games, you talking to your friends, you playing sports, going to do things, organising events or going to events, is that you have that power. And it's really important that you actually take up this challenge. Don't wait for other people to put on events that you will go to. Start making your own. And that's a book by Jones, lovely book. And this is the book. It's called Sweet Dreams, taken from the Eurythmics song, The Story of the New Romantics, by Dylan Jones, who was around at this scene. And on the front cover, there's a bunch of incredibly glamorous looking young people. And history kind of has said they were just dressing up. They weren't really serious. They didn't have any political views. Whereas punk is taken very, very seriously by a lot of the history. And these people were kind of put into a category of not that important.
Would this have been around the same time as kind of anarchy and all kinds of started up in music?
Yeah, great. So the anarchy comes just before the New Romantics. There's a bit of anarchy with the hippies, who think we want freedom, we want to change the world. And then we see anarchy coming back in to popular music during punk. Whereas people said, rip up the rules, do what you want. Don't accept constraints. I'll talk you through some of these beautiful people. One of them sold 16 million records. One of them sold 6 million records. And then unfortunately got done for shoplifting. He was shoplifting in a Teletubby. And he got, he was doing a load of heroin and a load of cocaine. So he had a bit of a tragic moment in his life, but then he got clean and sober and put that behind him. But he was incredibly young when punk came along. He was incredibly inspired. He lived in Wales. There's a lad there from Limerick who was one of the key people in this movement. So we'll introduce you to some of those people as we go on. And this is where the quote comes from. So the quote is from Vivienne Westwood, who was the partner of Malcolm McLaren. Malcolm McLaren manages the Sex Pistols, and Vivienne's the doer. Malcolm's the ideas guy. Vivian can make clothes. You know, this is her later in life. I think she got an award from the British government, an OBE or a CBE. And she's wearing a t-shirt saying, I am not a terrorist. Please don't arrest me. So she was very, very committed to the environment. Very, very committed to political campaigns, and was an incredibly successful public person who then had an exhibition in the Victorian Albert Museum. That was the highest attended exhibition ever there. So she's there in punk, and then these people come along really, really quickly after punk. But we'll give you a bit of context before punk comes along. 1973, incredible year for albums. Here's some albums from 1973. The Beatles. A double album. Goes to number 1 in the States. It's a huge seller because it takes all the Beatles singles from the previous days, because their manager is incredibly greedy. They've got an American manager who takes over when Brian Epstein dies, called Alan Klein, and he thinks, I know I can make a load of money, we'll do a greatest hits album. Photograph is taken at the EMI building, and the Beatles were on EMI. This is side A, and you might know some of those songs. Every one of those songs is iconic. And that's the first of 4 sides on this 2-album package. So it's no surprise this goes to number 1. And here's the album that had knocked off number 1. Any rockers recognize that?
I think it's Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. So here's Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin, and the Beatles knocked that off number 1. So it was a great time for exporting music to America from Britain and from Ireland. I put those green things on and censored it. I cancelled it. Does anyone recognise the location?
That's the James Causeway, isn't it?
Thank you. So it's in Ireland, so we're in there, we're top of the charts. And there it is, those incredible hexagonal stones, the Giant's Causeway. So Ireland is in there at this ultra cool moment where Led Zeppelin are number 1 and the Beatles knocked them off number 1. So who did Led Zeppelin knock off number 1? Elvis. Another icon, and this is Elvis's only album that goes to number 1 after 1963. It's the early 70s, but look at the technology. So this is satellite technology, and it's in the name of the album. That it's not just Elvis in Vegas playing to his fans. This is satellite. Now, there's a reason why Elvis concerts were broadcast globally. It was because his manager couldn't leave America. Colonel Tom Parker couldn't feel confident that if he left America that he'd be let back in. He possibly had murdered someone. And that's why he changed his name, got to America, and reinvented himself. So Elvis never toured, so this becomes incredibly important. And it's number 1 in America, just before Led Zeppelin, and just before the Beatles. What did Elvis knock off number 1? This one. Does anyone recognise that? Okay. Pink Floyd. I always thought this album was called Dark Side of the Moon, and it's not. It's called The Dark Side of the Moon. Didn't know about the but incredibly iconic, and all of these sold millions of records, and all of them are selling today. What did it knock off number 1? I don't expect you to know this band. I'd be scared if you did. Although I wrote to one of them, and he wrote back. And I asked him, would he write something for me about a treasured music memory? And he did. Anyone under the age of 50 recognise those? Do they look like a band that would go to number one? Absolutely not. And this is a very, very early publicity photo of them. And I want you to imagine this beautiful man in the dress.
I might know.
That was the album $1 Billion Babies. Incredible album with a beautiful cover. It's like a snakeskin wallet, and it opened up and the inside was like the inside of a wallet. So this band took a lot of care with how they looked and how their product looked. There they are on the inside. There's Alice looking more Alice-like when he got the gothic makeup. And the snake. He had a pet boa constrictor that became part of the show, and he lost it in a hotel. It got down into the pipes.
Alice Cooper, you said that was?
Yeah, Alice Cooper. And this is a quote from his manager, a man called Shep Gordon. He went to see Alice Cooper and he said, I've never seen such a strong negative reaction. People hated Alice. And I knew that anyone who could generate such a strong negative energy had the potential to be a star if the handling of the situation was right. So the manager recognised controversy, and he spent a lot of time making things more controversial. Now we're going to leap from the early 1970s, but now you've got a bit of context. That the early 70s produced some of the most iconic records, but also produced managers who knew, let's whip up a bit of controversy. Let's get people talking. And we're going straight to 1980 from there. And we're going clubbing. Okay, here's a nightclub in Birmingham, 1980. What do you notice about the people, how they're dressed? What do you think of them? Are they cool? Are they dated? Is it?
It's very all.
It's very.
Alternative.
Yeah, it's alternative. This isn't streetwear. This is casual wear. When you think of what else is going on in the early 80s, it's before the shoulder pads come in and the big hair. And these young people are making a statement.
I think one or two of them look like Elvis.
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of the guy in the purple suit and sort of the guy in a white one.
Yeah.
I think they do.
Okay, and I'll take that because a lot of care was taken by this group of young people with their hair, with old rock style. They took things from film stars from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They took stuff from Elvis, from the great performers. And here they are. So this club, that's right down the name, it's in Birmingham, and it's called the Rum Runner. The Rum Runner, and these are the early New Romantics. And they're having a great time. You've got the mirror. I'm going to draw your attention to a couple of things. One is, if you want to know how to do 80s dancing, this person here is showing you how to do it. You occasionally move your knee, and it's mainly about moving your hands.
This has been the height of disco music and stuff like that.
This is a disco, really good point. So these are young people in a discotheque dancing. So when we think of New Romantics, I want you to think that it was music made for people to dance to. Now punks jumped up and down and jumped around. It wasn't really music for dancing, so that's a really good point. A lot of these people grew up listening to soul music, to Motown, to the Supremes. And something really interesting happens in 1980. Synthesizers, keyboards become available. Cheap. If you can't play the guitar, because it's quite complicated to play the guitar, you might try the bass. But there's 4 strings on the bass, it's quite difficult. Synthesizer, one finger, one key, and you're getting a sound. So there was a whole lot of these young people who were experimenting with new sounds. The other thing, I mentioned Elvis, I want you to have a look. This was new, this was part of the revolution, hair crimping. And it was basically like you got a toaster or a sandwich maker, but a portable one, and you put it on your hair and you kind of burnt your hair into staying in position. It looked fantastic. But a lot of these people are now, like me, bald. So there was a danger. What else do you need to know? Yeah, this young person has a very new romantic look. Long, frilly white shirts and red belts. And then do something remarkable with your hair, do something remarkable with your makeup, and you've got part of the look. So this is the Rum Runner 1980 in Birmingham. And from the outside it looks like nothing. Now where's the subliminal message in that? Is that sometimes clubs, sometimes venues look like nothing from the outside. It's what you do with them. You've all got great taste. Like imagine what you could do with this room. Now there are limits because it's a daytime place. But imagine what you could do if you owned a warehouse space with a license for dancing, maybe for selling alcohol.
You know if the Rum Runner is still around in Birmingham?
Oh, it's gone, it's gone.
Maybe not.
Yeah. And that's a great question, because a lot of these places were there for the moment and then they're gone. But this was a lovely club. You saw the inside of it. Not all the clubs were quite as beautiful. And there's the house band. So some of the young people who went there liked music enough to kind of learn it. And this was the band, and they used to play there every week in Birmingham. And they sold 35 million albums. So let's write down their name. They're called Duran Duran. And they were just a house band in Birmingham, not the centre of Britain. But it was a great place for them to learn. And again, anytime I look at photos from this era of the bands, I want to see what are the people wearing.
Just on that, if there's like a cross-gender makeup for men, and if it was like an opening for different genders to our feelings, it wasn't expressed then, but I think it was an underneath feeling that they could feel safe in expressing themselves.
Okay, that's a brilliant point. This was a moment where young people felt incredibly free with how they presented themselves to the world. So there was a lot of gender fluidity. There was a lot of invitation to be what you want. Don't let the world tell you who to be. So this was a moment where men started wearing makeup on the street and dressing up. This was a time when women started dressing up, really flamboyant, and where, you know, we often think of genders as man and as woman, that it's not that simple, it's not that straightforward, and I think a lot of that safety, and I love that you said safety and freedom, these people wouldn't have been comfortable on the streets, or at a football match. 1980s is the height of trouble on the terraces, and these young people who grew up with David Bowie, they grew up with rocks and music, could go to a club and they could do anything they wanted.
Back in the 80s, the church would have had a lot of power. Would they have kind of had problems with this sort of, with the discourse and stuff like that? Or, because surely there would be protests from religious organisations and stuff like that, causing the transgender and kind of a transgender association.
So 1980, the Catholic Church is incredibly strong in Ireland, incredibly strong in Poland. It's not so strong in Britain. And that's a really, really good. Now, you had vicars who would come out and say, punk rock is Satanism, stop it. But I think that the church never really laid into the New Romantics because they dressed up to go out clubbing and with their friends, and they felt safe. But it's a really, really good point that there's always a context for music.
There's a very interesting archival footage on RT's website when punk started first coming to Ireland.
Yeah.
In like the journalists and stuff like that as if they were treating them like they were vampires.
Yeah.
Or that they were like just weird for it, like, you know. It's like you're a man or you weren't meant to be. It's just really interesting, you know.
Okay, that's a great point. And when you talk about the interviewer, that interviewer was the biggest superstar in Ireland at that time, a guy called Gay Byrne. And you're spot on, he was very patronising to young people. And he was talking to a guy called John Fiddler, who had the big beehive hair and looked fantastic. I said, like, why do you look like that? Do you not think you look stupid? And you're spot on. So the church and sometimes the media can really try and push people into a corner where you're not meant to act. You're not meant to have that much freedom. But that's a brilliant point. That footage is fantastic. And it's really, really good. Again, look at the audience. This guy now, I don't know if it's him. Are there any Doctor Who fans here? Okay. Does that not look like the guy who wrote Doctor Who? And then wrote Sherlock? So I don't know if, like, I'll find out. I think there's a good chance it was him. And then you can see, you know, people dressed up like characters from Thunderbirds, which was a puppet show. They just wanted to do what they wanted.
It's funny looking back at this right now in Birmingham in the 80s, because my dad used to dress up like this in
Right.
Nouveau Antiquaire, but he also ran pubs in Birmingham in the 1980s, like the Crown, the Aston, all that, and like UB40, I think filmed one of their music videos in the Aston while he was working there during the time. But as well as that, he also like did a bit of sound engineering and DJing, so he would work on other pubs as well. And like he told me the story once about there was this guy who looks like Sting that came into his pub, but apparently it was this German guy, but he kept his my dad still claims that it's Sting, but he kept his identity in, and it was just him playing in the Aston as well. Like I was looking it up there with Duran Duran as well. I'm not 100% sure if he came to the Aston, but he did in 1980. They did in 1983 come to Aston Villa Football Club for a charity event.
Amazing.
And it just, like, during that time, my dad probably would have been in the stadium because, like we'd be running pubs nearby there and everything. And it's just fun to see. It's kind of nostalgic to see it because, like, my dad would talk about these stories and everything, like, during his time, like, how freeing it was, like, to have all these bands.
Amazing.
To know a lot of them. And it's just good to see this.
Oh, that's brilliant. And people like your dad, by opening up their pubs and their clubs to people who looked a little bit alternative, a little bit different. Look at the red, you know, the beautiful red makeup on the men and the women. Like, they're striking. They look like pop stars. They look like David Bowie or 1920s movie stars. And you can imagine how much fun they had getting ready to go out and then going out dancing. And you see the synthesizers coming in. You mentioned UB40. Here's a great UB40 story. So UB40 you probably know. They're a reggae band, not from Jamaica. They're from Birmingham. So they're not seen as centre. But they're the second highest selling reggae band. Only Bob Marley has sold more reggae records than UB40. And UB40 saw Duran Duran really early, around this stage, and they phoned their booking agent and said, look, it's not really our music, but there's a couple of young guys who we think that they could be really, really huge.
Sorry, for people who choose to open up their places of business to new managers like that, you know, setting up places for bands and things like that, how beholden were they to safety laws? Because I can't remember when this was, but I remember there was a pretty big incident back in the 1900s that caused a lot of people to die from safety incidents. My remembrance, because the band themselves and the security guards were escorted out the exit, and the security guards refused to let the crowd exit from the building to said exit, and people are panicked, trying to quite a few people dead.
Really, really important point. Thanks, Daniel. Really important point. Do young people have safe places to go that conform to fire regulations? And in Ireland, around this era, we had a terrible fire in the Stardust in our town, and allegedly the fire entrance was padlocked, and young people who your age who went out to have a dance and a drink with their friends that didn't come back. So that's really important. So you've got the church, you've brought up the church, you've brought up the television personalities treating young people like vampires or weirdos. And then you've got, you know, are there safe places? And you know, when things happen, venues close down or the insurance goes up. So really, really good point. So there's Duran Duran really early, but they're not the start of the movement. They're right there. They're almost the start. So let's look at what was happening just before them. There's classic Duran Duran photo. And you can see the makeup on John Taylor at the back, the hair. I'd say there's a bit of crimping going on there. And they were just young lads in Birmingham. Some of them loved punk before, some of them were serious punks. And then this other way of dressing came along. Back to Blitz. So the Blitz Club in London started in a gay bar called Louise's. And it was just young people looking for somewhere they could listen to the music they liked. And it was started by the man who looks like he's just been bitten by a dog. And his name is Steve. Steve Strange. Loved Bowie, loved punk. And there was an exhibition recently, a major exhibition of the legendary Blitz Club that transformed 1980s London style and generated a creative scene that had an enormous impact on popular culture in the decade that followed, from fashion and music to film, art and design. So these young people, your age, created a whole scene, but the scene wasn't just let's go out and dancing and having a laugh and dressing up. There was so much creativity that flowed from that you're still seeing it. You're surrounded by the scene that they created and the freedom, the sense of adventure. There's the lad from Limerick. So his name, because he set up the club with Steve Strange, his name is Rusty, with red hair. Rusty Egan. So you were there, you were represented. Other people you might recognise. There's Midge Ewer, who goes on to be a member. He was in Thin Lizzy briefly. And then he joined a band called Ultravox. They were huge sounds. And here's the first published photo. They moved from Louise's to another venue that was really old and dowdy, and they called it, in Louise's it was called the Bowie Night, because they loved David Bowie. And they loved German synthesizer music. And they kind of rejected punk, because they thought all the punks looked the same in their leather jackets and ripped jeans. We want to dress up. Who would you recognise there? There's Boy George, who worked in the coat check. So he would take people, you'd pay 50 pence, and he'd look after your coats. And he'd go through your pockets and steal stuff as well. He's written about it, I'm not making that up. So he was just, he was young. And there's Steve Strange. And every week they came dancing as a new person, a new personality. How can you do that? Because they're really creative, and a lot of them understood fashion, and a lot of them understood what Vivienne Westwood understood, how to make stuff. So there's the first photo of them.
Would these have been affected by the kind of creation of MTV and things like that? Or?
Okay. MTV becomes incredibly important because it comes along in 1981, but it's a year away. So these people are doing this before MTV becomes the way we consume music, which is visual. But it becomes really important to these bands, so great call. None of these wave-making heroes, as they were described, was older than 22. So they were 17, 18, 19, 20. Incredibly young to start a club and an entire scene. And then bands that go on to sell millions. there's a photograph. There's the lad from Limerick. He's got a suit on, Rusty Egan. And this is one of the earliest photos of them. And sitting in the centre are a band called Spandau Ballet. And they're the key band from this scene. But there are men, there are women, there are gays, there are straight people, and they just wanted to have a laugh and to do something. But I think what they achieved hasn't really been acknowledged culturally, because they look silly, according to the people who put young people in boxes. Stand out that way. Their average age, not 22 like the previous lot, average age 20. So most of them are teenagers. You've got 7 musicians, 6 designers, 3 media journalists and one of the managers, 3 people who set up clubs, 2 DJs, 1 crimper, hairdresser, and 22 egos. But the ripples went around the world from these stylish young people. And there's the lad from Limerick again. I tried to coordinate that with the colour of his hair. Because it was like, this scene was about hair. Hair was incredibly important. Okay, here are 2 of the people from the club. One is Michelle Clapton, and one, her name in the club was Claire with the hair. You can imagine which is which. Claire with the hair, it's quite evident. Do any of you know Michelle Clapton? Have you heard of her, or would you know her work? But a hand.
I've heard of her.
Okay.
Where I heard of her, I do recognise the name then.
Brilliant. There she is in the middle. Photograph taken recently. Does anyone recognise what's going on there?
The fashion show?
No, it looks like a fashion show. These are some of the costumes she designed for a TV show called The Crown.
Oh, I'm watching clips of that.
I'm not going to say that's the best way to watch it, but...
I know.
So this young woman who's a teenager going to the club who loved fashion, she went on to have a career in fashion. I think some of you might know her designs. I think you might have seen them. Now, she didn't do all of Game of Thrones, but I think when she went and did it, her stuff looked fantastic.
I've actually seen a lot of them in person in the Belfast studio.
You went up to see, yeah. And they're unreal when you, like, it's one thing seeing them on TV.
They're so small in person.
Yeah.
They're tiny.
Brilliant. Okay, they're great. But think of the genius that goes into making these people look like characters in a fantasy novel come to life. This is all directly traceable. We can trace her back to the new wave of the new romantics. What would you say that man does for a living? There's a hint. He makes hats. So again, he was some of them made dresses, men's clothes, and this guy is, what's a fancy name for a hat maker? Thank you, a milliner. Do we have any Irish milliners that you've heard of? Philip Tracy went to IADT. But again, from that club, here's someone who had a whole lifetime in fashion. And his name is Stephen Jones. In 1979, so while this scene is just bubbling under, he designs for Ferrucci. So some of the leading names in fashion are going to fashion students and to young people who are making a scene. 1980, Steve Strange, before he was caught shoplifting with the Teletubby, gave him some money to set up his business. And it opened nearby in a very, very cool shop called PX in Covent Garden that Steve Strange worked in. Covent Garden, some of you might have been there when you're in London. Covent Garden in the 1980s was incredibly run down. It was a greasy, grubby, smelly, old fruit market. which is why young people were able to find a building, a club, for a decent price. Now, if you wanted to rent a club in Covent Garden, can you imagine? You couldn't, but they went to out-of-the-way places. And then those out-of-the-way places sometimes become mainstream. 1982, he had his first fashion show and his first televised show, and at this point, Lady Diana, Princess Diana, was buying his stuff as well. All from this nightclub scene of people having fun. Who else doesn't do stuff for Grace Jones, Diana Ross, George Michael, Spandau Ballet, Culture Club? He was in the video for Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? And then he made hats for Wham, Wet, 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 Madonna, Erasure, Brian Ferry and Barbara Streisand. Later, blah, 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 York, Usher, Pink, Tori Amos, Macy Gray, the Spice Girls. So these people who were incredibly young and incredibly inspired by music to come together, they go on to change fashion. He created hats for 3 major tours in 2005, Kylie Minogue, Rolling Stones, and Marilyn Manson. Like when you think of the range there, and he's able to have the ability to make what those pop stars need to make their show be incredibly spectacular. Fiona Dealey was another one of the early Blitz kids. There she is with a dress she designed. Again, it becomes iconic, but you can see it's coming from young people thinking, I want to look cool, I want to make clothes that work for me. I'm not just going to buy stuff off the peg. And when they did this list of the 50 most important dresses of the century, she was number 12 with that dress. Judy Franklin was another student who went there. And there's Steve Strange is wearing one of her hats. Does anyone know where this picture comes from?
I think it was from the
You're so correct. David Bowie, Ashes to Ashes video. One of the most expensive videos made at that time, and he wanted to look spectacular, so he went to the Blitz Club and he said to Steve Strange, will you be in my video? And Steve Strange was a lifelong Bowie fan, absolutely. And Bowie said, yeah, but it's at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Steve Strange was running the club until 5:30. And he said to Steve Strange, I need 3 other people as well, will you just pick them? Just cool looking. So David Bowie felt so confident of these teenagers and early 20 people that he said, just come and look great, look fabulous. I'm not going to tell you what to wear, even though he could have. He gave them freestyle. So there's Ashes to Ashes, and that was a really big moment for them. But that was her student project. And this, I can't even describe what they're wearing. Really early photo of Spandau Ballet. They look like they're going hunting, like with Prince Charles shooting pheasants. I don't even know what that look is. And Sherlock Holmes then on the base. But sometimes, yeah, another big thing in this era, if any of you know where the nearest Duns is, long white socks. Long woolen socks. Like you're climbing up the Austrian Alps. But you can see it's just young people having fun with what they dress. Thinking the rules, the conformity doesn't apply to us. And there's kind of the classic new romantic look. You see the scarves, the leather trousers, the very, very coiffed hair, the headbands, and belts were incredibly important, and frilly shirts. So there's the classic look. Still selling, people are still listening to them. Millions of records sold, and they come from that scene. They're working class, and that's quite revolutionary at that time. And the punks were seen as a working class movement, but a lot of this movement were working class, and there were people from various backgrounds. But this was a working class group of guys We just thought, we love David Bowie, we love soul music, and we want to do something for us, for our mates that we enjoy. Their first gig, they never ever ever perform in public until they play in Blitz in 1980. Blitz has never ever had a gig until Spandau Ballet played. So you can see the club and the band have formed this symbiotic relationship. Rusty Egan from Limerick, Steve Strange from Wales, they do a big party in 1980, and it's Spandau Ballet Stadium. There they are, that's their second gig, but that's the Blitz Club. Can you see the photo on the background? This is how old-fashioned the club is. It's Winston Churchill. So there were photos of politicians and British royalty. They didn't make any attempt to dress up the club. Just thought, okay, that's the way it is. It's going to be all about the people, all about how you look.
I suppose the name Blitz is all the more fitting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can see synthesizers, really important. The look change constantly, but here they are in their second ever gig, with second gig in Scotland. And here's the response to the playing. And this is their manager, Steve Dagger. Halfway through the set, I was feeling quietly confident. I was standing by the mixer desk next to the sound engineer when I became aware of a man standing next to me. He spoke to me. Who is this band? The manager said, Spandau Ballet, because they're brand new. And because it was a new name, he thought, oh, the new name sounded effing great. The guy, tall guy beside him says, which record label are they signed to? They aren't signed. So they didn't have a record deal, they were playing for the Blitz people. Who's their manager? I am. And he grew up with them. So he's 19, 20, 21, he's a youngster as well. And now this guy is asking him, what's the name of that band? And who's their manager? And he says, well, I'm Chris Blackwell, and I own Island Records, and I would like to sign them. And they haven't even got through their first ever gig. Chris Blackwell, you might know him. Who did he sign? He signed Bob Marley. He signed U2. He signed a band called Traffic that are well worth listening to. He's